What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with John and Kitty of St. Agnes. It is great to be able to talk with you. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, anytime, anytime. This new album, Bloodsuckers, is absolutely kick ass. I had the privilege of hearing it, and it is a crazy album. I really like how every song plays by its own rules. For people who haven't heard the album yet, though, do you feel that singles such as Animal, the title track, Bloodsuckers, and Outsiders is a good representation of this whole album, or is that just scratching the surface of what's to come?
Definitely just scratching the surface. Like as you say, the album is like, oh, there's a lot going on in there. And I'd say like with Bloodsuckers and Animal, like these are kind of more like the bangers, aren't they? I guess that have come out, and there's a lot more like emotional depth to come for people. There's a song on there that's like a lot softer, a lot gentler.
It's the next single.
The next single,
this is
yeah.
not the end, yeah. And it kind of breaks the album in half. It's the end of side A if you're listening to it on vinyl, which is kind of how we designed the record to be listened to.
I think definitely that like punk ferocity in those tracks is throughout the album, but there's definitely like more depth to come.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I consider this to be like a very experimental album. I mean, for some journalists, it's their worst nightmare because they don't know what to categorize it as. But I think that's an advantage for in my eyes. Like, so was there at all maybe a preconceived vision behind the making of this album, or being that it was so experimental, there was almost kind of like no rules, and you were just kind of like letting things happen organically and fall into place?
I'd say like when we first were thinking about making the record, we did have an idea for what it was going to be. Unfortunately, my mum passed away, and it was this very, very difficult time. Like it was very sudden and unexpected, and she was very young. And that completely changed everything, really, for me as a person and the band. So she passed away, and we started writing and recording really like weeks after it happened. So I think we'd gone earlier, we'd thought like we have this concept for an album, but that all just got turned on its head. And I think the only thing I cared about was making something that I loved in its entirety and that I thought was a real authentic and honest album. That became the most important thing. And so it didn't really matter to us like what genres we were pulling from, like what we were we had no like structure, but we want it to be like a new metal album, or we want it to be this or that. It really was just like we want to get across emotion because I was going through such a difficult time. How best can we do that? And that's how we made the album. That's what drove the album.
Yeah, to us the kind of like what some people might see as experimental in terms of like different genres that we've pulled from, to us it feels really natural because we're just using the things that are part of our kind of musical DNA. They're things that we listen to, or things we like, or things that we've kind of played around with before. And we're able to reference when Kitty and I are writing. I'll be like, oh, do your kind of like tremolo pick guitar thing that you're really good at. And then I've got like this fuzzy bass line or something that I want to do with it. And then we just kind of go with it. And then some people hear it and be like, oh, so you've got like a kind of Western cowboy guitar and then a hip hop bass or something. I'm like, that's not how we thought of it. You know, we were just playing to our strengths and playing in the moment. And the common thread throughout the whole album is Kitty's kind of vocal performance, and the kind of pure, authentic, like rage and like heartbreak first. That was the focus, was to capture those performances to really do the songs justice. And that came from Sean Bevan, who worked on the very first song we recorded for the album, Follow You. He's the only other person that's involved with like the technical side of the record, just on one song. And he worked with Nine Inch Nails, and did like some of our favorite records. And when we were just about to record the album, Kate was in a really wild headspace. Everything was really difficult for her, and we were, how are we going to capture this? And Sean said, don't worry about like hi-fi quality. He's like, just hand Kitty like a live microphone that she'd use on stage and just let her do her thing and just get the performance. He goes, that's what we did with Trent Reznor for Nine Inch Nails stuff. And he goes, and it works. So just do that and you'll be good. And that just gave us permission really to stop freaking out about this is a major label album and we need to make sure everything sounds super slick, and just be like, you know what, if he said that's the way to go, we'll do that. And as soon as we did that, we felt so comfortable, and it just felt like all bets were off and we could just do whatever the hell we wanted and just please ourselves.
Yeah. And I mean that, and with Spine Farm too, that's always what they want. They always want their artists to go with their gut instincts. I mean, it worked well for Sleep Token in that regard, and I think I think it helps. I think Spine Farm is a sort of one size fits all, and like just go at it and do what you so please.
Yeah, their culture is definitely that. Dante, who's their A&R guy that we've known for a long time, we've developed a really good relationship with him before we signed to them, and we would never have signed to a major label if it wasn't for him.
Our first album, Welcome to Silvertown, we released on our own label, and everything we do is super DIY, and we're in control of absolutely everything, to the point where we make our own videos, and I mean we do everything. So, you know, signing with a major label was like not something we would ever consider if it hadn't been for how great Spine Farm are at that exact thing of just like, you do you, like that's why we signed you, go and make a record and bring it to us. So
yeah.
Does it at all have any relationship with Bloodsuckers, because you have an EP called Vampire, which, you know, conceptually and tidally, you know, like it could have a similar principle. So does it at all maybe connect conceptually in that regard as well?
Definitely. Definitely. Like the vampire theme has kind of been running through stuff that we've been doing since day one. We've always had an idea of the half of our band kind of sits in this slightly sort of fantastical world, like slightly make-believe world that allows us to tell stories with a really like heightened emotion and heightened characters. With this record, because it's so much more kind of like personal and real for Kitty lyrically, Bloodsuckers in this case became a way of talking about people who try and push you down. They take energy to deal with in your life. They're, you know, whether it's people that you're kind of like having to deal with at work, at school, or it's people in your home that are causing you like real problems. That's what Bloodsuckers means. But the crossover kind of comes from the idea that we're still using that same kind of imagery, because Vampire was kind of about, Vampire was more about, it was written during COVID, and it was more down to the idea of like the internet, people living their lives on the internet, and the kind of vampiric existence that leads you to have, where everyone is kind of feeding off each other.
I think the other thing as well is just me and John both are just goths basically, and just always have been attracted to things that are dark. And I remember being like a little kid, and my favourite film was The Addams Family. Like I just absolutely, from like such a young age, was always attracted to things that were dark, scary, gothic. And it's odd, isn't it? Like, you know, like why would a little kid be like attracted by it? And you were the same, right?
Yeah.
And I just think, what, like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Like, why?
Yeah, definitely.
Like, it's an odd thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, millions of people are the same. Like I'm guessing you're probably not that different. And you know, like most alternative people for people that aren't alternative, they're like, why do you dress like that, or why are you attracted to that? They're like, why do you like skulls and stuff? And it's like, I don't know. I just do.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Oh yeah, go on.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I think a lot of people are just naturally like that. For one, I think we live in a fucked up world, and with the advent of social media and everything, the most fucked up aspects of the world are just constantly in front of us all the time. So I just think it's just a natural reaction. I think, you know, like the way that all living things have homeostasis, which allows them to adapt to their environment. I think that we adapt to our environment in that regard as well. And then other people's reaction is to maybe escape from it and maybe not have that as part of their environment, which I think neither or is right or wrong. So
yeah, it's a coping mechanism of sorts. You know, it's like it's a symptom of what's going on. Yeah, like we've always been attracted to the dark side of stuff, and you know, it's we see ourselves as kind of like vampire-like characters, kind of like.
I think it's like the concept of the outsider, isn't it, as well? Like, you know, particularly if lots of people who are into heavier music feel like outsiders. You've always felt quite other, and like defiantly other as well. It's like a warm of a badge of honor, right? Like I think a lot of metalheads are like, it's being an outsider, but by choice, because I don't want fucking anything to do with all that stuff you guys are into. I think that's like, you know, like fucked up.
Yeah.
We're gonna go and do like our things. I think that's part of it as well, the outsiderness.
But darkness is sometimes a dangerous substance to utilize as a subject matter. I've always said that when artists, regardless of the medium, has so much negativity as the source of inspiration, that this can sometimes become victimized by their own product in a way. So does the songwriting process have, whether it will be with, you know, writing darker lyrics or creating the darker sound, does it almost sometimes have to be done in moderation, or is there a way of creating that so it isn't so consuming from the inside out?
I think if we were the kind of band that we were like more like a death metal band where you're creating darkness, you have to willingly put yourself in a mindset, and I can kind of see that would get really draining and potentially somewhere that you wouldn't necessarily want to always be, like trying to conjure the most gruesome images you can. But this album is as a result of a real life thing that happened to Kitty, and the darkness was, you know, you'd say it's better than me, like your attempt to kind of like externalize it so you can then deal with it on the outside of you rather than retain it.
Absolutely. It's getting it, you know, it's getting a darkness was, you know, forced upon me, like nothing I could do about that fact, you know, trauma, nothing I could do about it. What I could do was like turn those emotions into, you know, art, which is something I've always done. Like whatever's going on in my life, I'll take it and make it into music or art, and I think it's an attempt to like get it, I keep doing this, to like get it out of me, to be able to like look at it and therefore like better understand it and work through it and things like that, like turning that trauma into something like tangible. And I was quite nervous started like making the album because I wasn't sure if it was the right decision, because obviously my mum had just died, and you know, I'm thinking, how am I going to get through this? I'll make a record, you know, about it. I'll open myself up to that grief and emotion totally, so I can like deliver this record in the most authentic way. And we were worried, like maybe this is a crazy thing to do. Maybe I should just be, you know, in bed for a year and just not be opening myself up with this over and over again.
Yeah.
But looking back, you know, like it's, you know, a year, I guess, since we started.
Yeah,
over a year.
Yeah.
It definitely was the right thing to do. It was healthy. It turned out to be like a healthy thing to do.
I think that's why there's some like real positive, like almost like euphoric feelings in moments on the album, and that's because Kitty was in that very moment overcoming a negative feeling. You know, you didn't have to put yourself in that mindset. You were there, so you were like, well, I'm here. I'm in this like horrible place. What am I going to do with it? And you made something positive from it.
I did. I decided like very early on. I don't have any choice in anything that's going on right now. What I can choose to do is like find light in this darkness, find positive. That's a choice I can make. And I think when traumatic things happen to you, you feel so helpless that getting to like make any decision is like empowering. So I decided early on, I'm going to make this awful thing that's happened into something, you know, good, something positive.
Well, being that this was a project that was born out of an essence of grief and an essence of pain that can't be replicated no matter how hard you try, and I don't think anybody would want to feel that type of pain again. Being that it seems like Vampire in your previous work was done like in a way like portraying a character and maybe like told from the point of view of something else, and this is a very personal album. Is a personal approach going to be something you think St. Agnes is going to stick with in the future, or do you think that maybe you're going to go back to maybe portraying external metaphors outside of yourselves?
Really tough to say, I think, because we just do, you know, we do whatever we feel is the right thing in the moment. Having now done something, I think, a lot more vulnerable and brave, I think, as well. I think I'd find it hard to go back to being more charactery.
Yeah, I think there's like we've sort of found ourselves in a place that we're really glad to have found ourselves, I think, in terms of our approach. That Kitty and I have a constant dialogue about writing music. You know, we're together all the time writing and being creative and making videos and everything. And we're always refining our process and like exploring new avenues. And I just feel like we've just begun really on this side of it. That being said, I think that we had a song on a previous EP called The Meanest Little Kid in Town, and something like that, which was very like character driven, was actually really using that character as a metaphor, really for quite a similar lyric to what's ended up as Outsider on this album. And so when we play that song live, I feel like a really deep, like it's a really personal feeling song, and I feel really moved by playing that one. So
I guess they don't have to be mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah.
Like you can find a way to do both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we'll probably a little bit of each will kind of like filter through, but we'll trust ourselves in the moment. We won't plan it.
Well, and again, I think Blood has always been kind of like, because when you look at the album artwork to the Family Strange EP, and then you have the Vampire EP, and then you have an album titled Bloodsuckers, it seems like regardless of what point of view it's told from, whether it is in a personal place of pain or it is portraying something else, it almost seems like it's all going to kind of like visually and sonically connect with that sort of blood concept in a way, right?
Yeah. There's always been the whole from day one of the band, like I can see the progression perfectly. I know that for some people dipping in and out of our discography might find some of the changes in style like a little jarring, but if you listen to it from the first song released up until where we are now, there is a line through the whole thing, and it's that kind of darkness, and the kind of our approach has kind of just been developing the whole time. But I still feel kind of like the same person in a lot of ways as I did then, in terms of what I want to get across. I want people to feel an escape to somewhere that is other, and then when they're there, be totally immersed in the story that we're telling them, or totally immersed in the feeling that we're trying to portray them. Our first job as artists is to try and take people out of their seat and put them in our world.
Do you think that could add a lot more context to this material? Because again, circling back to Bloodsuckers, with how personal it is and how grief-driven that it is, but when people, listen to this album and they interpret it or resonate with it in their own way, is that going to maybe add another layer of meaning or add another layer of context to it?
Definitely. I'm interested to see how people respond to it, because while some songs it's really quite obvious what Kitty's trying to say or what we're trying to say, there's grief isn't the only emotion on the album. Grief frames the album, but there's a lot of other stuff on there, dark subject matter that we're not quite so happy to talk about, that is more open to interpretation. And
I think already, like, I played it to some friends of mine, and one in particular, she picked out a song as like her favourite song, and I know why she chose that. She's my friend, I know what's going on in her life, and I know why that song resonated with her so much. It's not what I wrote the song about. It was really interesting to see, like, the reason it was her favourite is because of a certain reason that's not the subject matter. So that was that was interesting.
It is interesting, yeah. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how people respond to it and what they hear that we didn't intentionally put in there.
This universe.
Sorry, go on.
This universe that you do create within the band, and this sort of like concept, was this always the vision behind Saint Agnes in a way, or did it kind of just develop over time as you were making more and more music and jamming more and more together?
That's from day one, really. Like, the world of Saint Agnes has just been the concept, and we've fleshed it out as we've gone, right?
Yeah, we just, every time we're talking about songs or videos or anything, we always know roughly the framework it has to sit in, because to us it is this other place that we kind of know, and it's a place that kind of exists in our minds, so we can just,
like, it's something, like, it will either feel St. Agnes-y or it won't, and if it doesn't, then we don't do it. Even if it's a really good song, we think it's a good song, if it doesn't feel St. Agnes-y, we don't use it. So I'd say it's always been there, but it grows.
Yeah, and like visually, we've always been attracted to the same things. We like to blur the line between what's real and what's not real, like what's a character and what's us. And sometimes when you play a bit more of a part of a character, you realize that actually, no, I'm just getting to be more authentically me. Someone might think it's a character, but I'm actually getting to be more authentically me. And other times it is just a character, but the audience don't know which one's which, and we don't always know going into it which one's going to be which. And I think that's what keeps it really interesting for us. And it's a world that we feel more at home in than we do in our normal day-to-day life.
And that kind of led me perfectly into my next question. I have two more left for you, because I've
Sure.
always said that art is life, and it can grow and it can develop. Sometimes it could even eventually die in that regard. So do you want every album or even song that you create to be like a snapshot of who you are at that particular time? Or do you maybe think that the artwork could evolve with you as you evolve over time?
Good question. I think that we don't, whilst we do talk a lot about what we're making and talk a lot about the art, ultimately we are quite spontaneous when it comes to the actual ideas themselves, like the real things. We've got a framework and we've got boundaries, like he said. Well, no, that's not Saint Agnes, and so therefore it won't, that song won't be on the record, or that video idea won't be used. We know what that framework is, but it's not set in stone. It evolves and changes as we grow and change. So I think that if we could fast forward 10 years, what we're doing will still feel St. Agnes-y, but what form that will take, we can't really predict. There will just be something about it. They'll be like, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense. It's those guys doing it. But it might sonically be quite a different approach, but we really don't know till we get there.
Yeah. And finally, what I wanted to ask you is, and you led me perfectly into it, and I kind of mentioned it at the very beginning, but every song on Bloodsuckers does play by its own rules in a way. I mean, I see industrial elements, metal elements, rock elements. I go back to the 80s and 90s, 2000s to now, even with it. So it's fair to say that, like, St. Agnes doesn't necessarily need to stick with a specific style, right? It almost seems like trying new things and experimentation is just as much part of the songwriting process as coming up with your lyrical concepts and your visual aspects as well, right?
Absolutely. Like, that's, as Kitty said earlier, we see ourselves as kind of band people more than musicians. We have producer minds rather than songwriting minds sometimes. And that experimentation, just trying something new, seeing what inspires us, it's been like that with everything we've done.
Yeah, and you're right, it could end up being any genre, and I think it would still work because it would feel St. Agnes-y.
Yeah. There's this element of, like, you are who you are, and your limitations also inform that. So even if we attempt to do, if we try to do a country record, we can't play that style convincingly. It would be our version of it, which would therefore sound St. Agnes-y, I think whatever we try to do. So, and the same if we were doing something like that was just more straight ahead, full on metal, I think we would still end up doing what we always do, which is try and break convention. A lot of genres of music have very strict parameters that bands can feel quite hemmed in by and defined by and not know how to deal with. We don't have that worry or pressure ever, do we, about certain guitar tone or pedal because it's the one you use for that particular type of metal, or we just don't have those.
Yeah, of course. And
it would make life a lot easier if we did.
Oh god, yeah. As you say, like for journalists and fans, even like someone who likes death metal. There's death metal bands. We're an odd proposition for people.
Yeah.
Well, the future has been getting more and more genreless, as we've seen with the likes of bands like Sleep Token or Bad Omens or even Dance Gavin Dance. So I think in the end, it's just part of the times we're living in, and I think that's what makes. I like this idea of all these styles coming into one. So if people want to call it a trend, it's an awesome trend.
Yeah.
So before we go, I want to thank you both so much for your time today. Is there just anything else with St. Agnes that you'd like to promote with the release of Bloodsuckers coming out this July in terms of shows coming up, or what else we could be expecting for the near future?
We're just about to head off on tour around Europe, which I know isn't totally relevant to your audience, but like we're heading off with Monster Magnet, who are an American band, and we've played them before, and that's going to be a great tour. And then we're coming back to the UK, doing a UK headline tour, and we've got a couple more singles coming out. And yeah, we're just going to be busy, just keep pushing ahead with that. Our main hope for this record is that there are people who hear it that it's the exact right record at the right time for them, and it means as much to them as it does to us, and they're able to use it to heal themselves some way or let something out. And then if they're able to do that and share it with someone else that they also know is going through the same thing and get their own usage from it, that's the desire, to create a larger network, kind of family of outsiders who all resonate with what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely going to happen in the future. I could definitely see that. So thank you guys so much, everybody. We are here with St. Agnes. Be sure to check out Bloodsuckers, coming out via Spinefarm Records this July. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.
Cheers, Alex. Thank you.
Cheers.